Hello, everyone. How are you doing? My name is Professor Gehan Selim. I'm a professor of architecture in the School of Civil Engineering at the University of Leeds. I'm here today to talk about my provocation topic, which is titled Architecture and Spatial Memory in Post-Conflict Urbanism. This provocation is based on research I conducted between 2013 and 2017, spanning several projects and architectural design studios. My aim was to uncover the complex and tangled relationship between space and memory, and to investigate people's relationship to space in post-conflict urbanism. In fact, I researched several contexts such as Nicosia, Berlin, Beirut. However, my focus today will be on Northern Ireland's urbanism. Territoriality has been a wide impact on people's everyday encounters of contact and social identity, driven by the post-conflict city's political history and segregation. And it's argued that even when segregated communities engage on a daily basis, they have no choice but to employ tactics and practices to challenge or resist these logistical realities by adapting alternative means of interaction in the city. And in fact, people formulate their own ways of contact or segregation strategies colored by memories of their troubling pasts. And they eventually generate closed integrated groups limited to their own members and distance themselves from the other community. My research here has been a journey to unreveal the notion of shareness as central to understanding the architecture and the urbanism of cities and towns in Northern Ireland. It expounds this concept through an investigation of the historical development, both of formal architecture and of spaces of everyday activity, interaction, and engagement. And I argue that our experience with the city's architecture can never be separated from everyday engagement with social memory, politics, and essential social cultural encounters. However, there is no single way to analyze the complexity and interrelation of the components and elements of cities. Thus, a layering of narratives that renders visible their inherent dynamics appears to be the most effective approach. And hence, this provocation will seek to layer its narratives of architectural and social developments as an urban experience in post-conflict settings over the past 2 decades. I look at the contemporary situation from the viewpoint of shared struggle with the physical and spatial imprints of the past rather than an engagement with the reality and demands of the present. And also equally putting ordinary people's everyday life at the center of this work. I try to understand how people engage with or benefit from the city at large in Northern Ireland, its architecture, urban spaces, public parks, public squares, and residential areas. The provocation also explores the condition of shared living in divided and segregated contexts and looks at how people perceive their cities and urban life and what determines their use of space and attitudes towards the public, the shared and the integrated spaces of the cities. And this condition actually regulates how patterns and attitudes change with time and in light of social and cultural demography changes. And it also develops a discussion of the complexity of the spatial manifestation of condition of post-conflict urban segregation and how the notion of shareness has been the center of changing living patterns. So let's move now to the context of this provocation. In Northern Ireland, a long history of ethnic and political conflict named the Troubles between Catholics and Protestants is still active. Between the 1960s and 90s, concrete walls filled working class neighborhoods as an iconic symbol of protection from fear and violence and conflict. Terrains on both sides were controlled and monitored while lacking consumption and leisure facilities. Beginning in the 1960s, state planning policies implanted industrial estates, infrastructure, and bridges to create buffer zones and barriers, drawing spatial gaps in the city and sectioning it into isolated parts and derelict in between zones. Narratives of change from an integrated city to one of divided enclaves were also reinforced by security-driven policies that led to undesirable patterns of social engineering. The result today is a multi-layered socio-spatial politics in which of communication, self-representation, and expression of identity are central to the experience of urban space and architecture, and where a spatial opposition of division and sharing living is a regular feature of everyday life. This is the situation that raises questions on how human activity and contact becomes a catalyst for conflict, and how public life is shared and used among young generations who are in great cases did or did not witness the Troubles. Even if more than 30 years have passed since the original causes, similar factors emerged from the young people by which they judged their territories as not satisfying their everyday needs or failing them, such as experiencing social exclusion and segregation, fearing crime, and lacking a cohesive community identity. So why shareness? Why looking at shareness in a divided context? In Kieran Carson's poem, maps used to analyze zones, areas, and borders do not reflect the actual life of a city or its urban context. He advocates that the city should be seen and read through the moments that define the experience of its people in their everyday lives. In the middle of the Troubles, Carson was critical of the absence of discoursing and discourse reflecting such understanding in a city otherwise defined on maps by barriers, barricades, and other spatial divisions such as the peace lines. He stresses that, no, don't trust maps, for they avoid the moment, ramps, barricades, diversions, peace lines. The map is pieced together bit by bit. I'm this map which they examine, checking it for error, hesitation, accuracy. A map which is the moment, in the interrogation, my replies. Segregation continues to influence actions in the present and determine future attitudes, and the city becomes an object of remembrance that is paradoxical and contested with different meanings and associations. Hence, the notion of shareness, however, represents the antithesis of social political division in the practice of everyday life, and I use it to identify a condition of cognitive belief by an individual or a group in the equal rights of others, those different in racial, ethnic, religious, or cultural background, actually to coexist in public space. I also use the term share or shared, which reflects the act or action of partaking jointly in activities with others, does not adequately translate the inner conviction of the rightness of such equal representation in public venues. In contrast, shareness communicates coherent social positions and defines the cognitive landscape of the urban experience in a given context. Throughout this research, interviews, and communications with members of various communities, I actually never encountered a situation in which a community members denied the rights of others to live in the city or have access to the same public spaces. It is only through the private micro-urbanism of the community and its boundaries, or through political representations of identity involving such charged symbols that threat or intrusion typically become matters of significant concern. So how post-memory and segregation can give us an understanding of the other and us. Post-memory perhaps is best defined as an enduring type of memory, even not personally experienced, but socially felt, a traumatic rupture that permanently scars a nation, a religious group, a community, or even a family. Post-memory exists as a powerful and very particular form of memory, precisely because its connection to its object or source is mediated not through recollection, but through the imaginative investment and creation. This memory often works simultaneously to connect subsequent generations to and distance them from their collective pasts. It helps provide frames for affirming social identities, communal traditions, and temporal continuity, while disciplining people within historical discourses that have silenced them verbally and can be neither understood nor recreated. I argue that post-memory in segregated ethnic groups reproduce their individual spheres of social identity and contact as well through closed cycles of interaction in a way that ties with their political and social preferences. I also start to see how different groups have established their own sense of belonging, which was grounded in their group membership and eventually became an important source of pride and self-esteem. And I do so by exploring how the young generation memories shape the spatial settings and political circumstances, are mediated and negotiated through the agency of visual landscape and oral narrative. Emphasis is therefore placed on the dynamic production of memoryscapes, memories of violence localized in particular sites, and then on narrative constructions of the past implicated in the ongoing search for meaning, historically truth, and identity. The young people in Northern Ireland also mostly learned about their history not only by hearing stories from their families and relatives, but by being exposed to what I call objects of conflict, like the walls, the fence, the borders, the flags, the murals, and that contextualizes and spatializes conflict surrounding them everywhere. The people communicate the memory of disturbing incidents through street and monuments displaying their sorrow and or the bravery of their people. And these objects and monuments gradually become cultural expressions used to demarcate ownership and claim public space. And indeed, for decades, the young people have been exposed to these objects on a daily basis, and through their school journeys, trips to and from the town centre, accessing amenities and visiting public parks, and more. And people gradually see these objects as metaphors to express their feeling and thoughts about inhabiting and living beyond their own territories. And they mostly incorporate these objects and metaphors into their everyday encounters and spatial practices. And the sage conveys areas of attack and resistance in a battle, and therefore it suggests the materialization of thought and practice as a way of protection, reaction, and progression from day to day. And over time, the identity of places becomes visualized and personalized by these objects, which unknowingly inform mutual contact and practices of the people of that part of the city. So the conception of sharing is based on the logic of struggle over rights and territorial claims, and trying to contest it using its extreme opposite as the spatial embodiment of neutrality in the use of public spaces, for example. Sharing space, however, does not necessarily entail unified and neutral cultures, but its positive engagement requires opportunities for self-expression, negotiations, and contestations of identity. The introduction of culture or themed quarters, business districts in post-conflict cities, whilst it's alienating sectarian division, has also reproduced a neoliberal ideology of gated enclaves that, even though not fenced off, it remains largely inaccessible to ordinary citizens due to the associated affordability and involved cost of being there. This capital-driven restructuring is thought to attract new investment in the property economy, to challenge spatial sectarian inefficiencies, and hence ethnic structures become less relevant. The new areas have been characterized by resegregation during comprehensive efforts and processes of desegregation, whereby new socially segmented spaces simply overlie stubborn patterns of segregation. To a large extent, this limited vision of branding, neoliberal capitalism, and physically led regeneration projects overlook substantial prerequisites of these spaces to thrive as living organisms. The social logic of the generated spaces, in Henry Lefebvre's term, is missing, with neither the layered activities nor possibilities of engagement that would allow these public spaces to act as mediating veins of continuous socio-spatial pulses among the active residential districts. Spatial practices enabled by those open modern spaces of the new zones remained largely different from those inherited in the city's built fabric and urban culture as well. And city spaces require certain knowledge of the local culturally accepted norms of behavior. Between individual liberty and the collective social contract, public spaces could be measured against their capacity for being shared or exclusive. And for example, a residential neighborhood would enforce a code of conduct for local streets. Hence, the understanding of such context in relation to individual expressions of identity can contribute to conflict resolution, as different to understanding of space can not only facilitate different ways of expressing and regulating identity, but also potentially facilitating coexistence between opposing groups. I will end my provocation here, and I would like to invite you, if you would be interested to read more about this provocation and its topic and themes, maybe have a look at this recent book that has been published in 2020, going into deeper theoretical conceptualization of the ideas that I have been discussing in this provocation. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm looking forward to meeting you soon in April. Thank you very much. All the best.